She was forced to marry a man twice her age. But what she uncovered after the wedding will leave you speechless. Before we begin the story, please leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Elena was the kind of girl who made the town of Willow Creek stop and stare. Her light caramel skin and soulful hazel eyes radiated a gentle beauty few could ignore. But what truly set her apart was her kind heart and quiet strength. Orphaned by her mother's death, Elena lived under the rule of her bitter stepmother, Marlene, who saw her as a constant reminder of everything she had lost and could never be. Despite a life filled with endless chores and sharp words, Elena never complained. Children adored her, and even the older women, while gossiping behind her back, could not deny her grace. Too beautiful for her own good, they often said. Lucas, her childhood friend and now a skilled carpenter, remained Elena's only source of comfort. Though a few years older, his loyalty never wavered. Every evening, he would bring her small gifts, berries, fish, sometimes just a smile, to remind her that she was not forgotten. But as Elena blossomed, Marlene's resentment festered into something darker. In her envy, she began weaving a plan, one that would forever alter the course of Elena's life. The days grew heavier for Elena as spring turned into summer. The air in her small home felt thick with unspoken resentment, and Marlene's sharp glances became even more cutting. Elena sensed that something was building, but she could never have imagined the betrayal that awaited her. One morning, before the sun had fully risen, Marlene's shrill voice pierced the air like a dagger. "Elena, come inside now." Elena hurried, wiping her hands on her worn skirt, her heart pounding. She entered the kitchen to find Marlene standing tall and rigid, a cold smile curling her lips. In the corner sat her father, Mr. Carter, silent and hollow-eyed, as if he were no longer truly present in the world. "You're to be married," Marlene announced, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "to Mr. Raymond." Elena's blood ran cold. Mr. Raymond, the elderly widower who lived on the edge of Willow Creek, leaning on his cane with every step. He was easily 3 times her age. "No," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't. I won't." Marlene's expression darkened, the fake sweetness vanishing like smoke. "You will," she snapped. "You think you're better than the rest of us. Better than the life we've given you? You're nothing but a burden. It's time you learned your place." Desperate, Elena turned to her father. "Papa, please," she cried, her voice breaking. "Don't let her do this. You know this isn't right." But Mr. Carter wouldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped, offering no support, no comfort. His silence was a knife that cut deeper than any of Marlene's cruel words. Marlene stepped closer, her voice a venomous hiss. "The arrangements are made. You'll be Mr. Raymond's wife before the week is out." Elena felt the walls closing in on her. The air seemed too thin to breathe. Her world, already fragile, shattered completely. When she finally escaped into the woods later that afternoon, Elena collapsed beneath a great oak tree, her body racked with silent sobs. The dreams she had once dared to have, of love, of freedom, of a life beyond Willow Creek, crumbled into dust. She thought of Lucas, his steady hands and kind smile. Would he even look at her the same once she became the wife of an old man? Would anyone? The thought of being tied to Mr. Raymond, of living a life not of her choosing, filled Elena with a deep, soul-crushing dread. She buried her face in her hands, praying for a miracle that felt impossibly far away. It was there, amidst her broken dreams, that Lucas found her. His boots made almost no sound on the soft earth as he approached, but Elena sensed him before she saw him. She lifted her tear-streaked face, and the look of concern in Lucas's gray-blue eyes nearly undid her. "Elena," he said softly, crouching beside her. "What happened?" The dam inside her broke. Between gasping breaths, Elena poured out her story: the forced marriage, her father's silent betrayal, Marlene's cruelty. Lucas listened, his jaw tightening, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "Mr. Raymond?" he repeated, disbelief flashing across his face. "They want you to marry that old man?" Elena nodded miserably. "There's no way out," she whispered. "I'm trapped." Lucas reached out, gently placing his calloused hand over hers. "I don't know how yet," he said fiercely, "but I'll find a way to help you. I promise, Elena. I won't let them steal your happiness." For the first time that day, a small flicker of hope stirred in Elena's heart. Lucas's words were a fragile lifeline, and she clung to them with everything she had left. Still, as the sun began to set over the forest and the heavy responsibilities of reality pulled at her once again, Elena knew deep down that the path ahead would not be easy. Pain and sacrifice would follow her every step, but she would not face it alone. The morning of Elena's wedding arrived cloaked in a heavy, oppressive stillness. Though the sky was bright and clear, the air in Willow Creek seemed to carry an invisible weight, as if the town itself sensed the wrongness of what was about to happen. Elena stood before a cracked mirror in her tiny bedroom, dressed in a plain ivory gown Marlene had hastily stitched together. The fabric itched against her skin, and her hands trembled as she tried to fix her hair. She barely recognized the pale, hollow-eyed girl staring back at her. Downstairs, Marlene barked orders while neighbors gathered outside, whispering behind their hands. Elena could hear the cruel murmurs through the thin walls. Such a shame. Marrying an old man just to survive. What a waste of beauty. Each word was a dagger she could do nothing to deflect. At the ceremony, held under the crooked oak tree at the edge of town, Elena stood with her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her father sat in the back, his eyes downcast. Mr. Raymond, stooped, wrinkled, and leaning heavily on his cane, stood beside her, his face unreadable. The local pastor spoke the vows, his voice dull and heavy with discomfort. Elena repeated the words because she had no choice. When the final "I do" left her lips, a small part of her soul withered away. In the crowd, Lucas stood stiff and silent, his heart breaking as he watched the woman he loved be bound to another man. Their eyes met for the briefest moment, and in Elena's tear-filled gaze, Lucas saw a silent plea. "Don't forget me." As the ceremony ended, Elena felt the full weight of her new reality settle on her shoulders. She was now Mrs. Raymond, wife to a man old enough to be her grandfather. The small hut Mr. Raymond called home was neat but worn, much like the man himself. That night, Elena sat by the tiny window, staring blankly at the fields beyond. She felt like a bird trapped in a gilded cage, her dreams clipped before they ever had the chance to take flight. Mr. Raymond, to his credit, was not cruel. He spoke little, moved slowly, and kept a respectful distance from Elena. But kindness could not bridge the chasm of emptiness she felt inside. Every knock at the door made her heart jump, hoping it might be Lucas come to rescue her, even though she knew it was impossible. All she had now were fading memories and a life she had never chosen. Days passed in a haze. Elena spent her time cleaning, cooking, and tending the small garden behind the hut. Each task felt meaningless, mechanical. The villagers' laughter haunted her as she passed through town for supplies. Their once admiring glances had turned into pity, or worse, disdain. It was during one of these miserable errands that Marlene returned to mock her once again. Dressed in a gaudy new gown, jewelry jingling with every movement, Marlene and her friend Lillian strolled up to Elena in the middle of the bustling market square. "Well, look who it is," Marlene cooed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Our little princess turned old man's bride." The villagers chuckled. Elena's face burned with shame, but she said nothing, clutching her basket tightly against her chest. Marlene stepped closer, her voice dropping to a cruel whisper. Tell me, Elena, does it feel good knowing you gave away your youth for nothing? That you'll live out your days washing an old man's socks while the rest of us dance at real weddings? Before Elena could react, a new voice cut through the crowd. That's enough. Everyone turned. Lucas stood a few paces away, his shoulders squared, his gray-blue eyes hard as steel. The bow he carried slung across his back seemed almost unnecessary. His presence alone was enough to command the moment. Marlene scoffed, tossing her curls. Lucas, always the noble fool. She's married now, there's nothing you can do. Lucas didn't flinch. He moved closer to Elena, standing protectively between her and Marlene. She doesn't deserve your cruelty, he said firmly. She deserves kindness, respect, and a life better than this town ever offered her. The market fell silent. Even the harshest gossips found themselves shifting uncomfortably under Lucas's piercing gaze. Marlene, realizing she was losing control of the scene, sneered one last time and turned on her heel, dragging Lillian behind her. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Elena and Lucas alone. Elena's hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming mix of gratitude and sorrow that welled inside her. Lucas turned to her, his voice soft again. Are you all right? Elena nodded weakly, tears pooling in her eyes. I'm trying. Lucas's hand brushed lightly against her arm, grounding her. You're not alone, Elena, he said. You never have been. For the first time since the wedding, Elena felt a small ember reignite deep within her. A flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't finished yet. The days after the wedding dragged on like a heavy chain around Elena's heart. Though Mr. Raymond, now her husband, was never cruel, his silence and distance filled their tiny home with a loneliness so thick it was almost suffocating. Elena spent her mornings tending to the small garden behind their cottage, and her afternoons sweeping the dusty floors or staring out the window, watching the world she used to belong to pass her by. Sometimes when the breeze carried the sound of children laughing or the church bell ringing in the distance, she would close her eyes and pretend she was still free. One evening, after an unusually long day at the market, where the villagers' whispers clung to her like shadows, Elena sat on the rickety bench outside the house, basket of supplies forgotten at her feet. The warm summer air did little to ease the tightness in her chest. Mr. Raymond approached slowly, leaning heavier than usual on his cane. He stopped a few steps away, studying her with an expression that was difficult to read. You didn't eat today, he said, his voice low and careful. I wasn't hungry, Elena replied, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded slightly and sat down beside her, the old bench creaking under his weight. For a long while they sat in silence, listening to the rustle of the leaves and the faint chirping of crickets. Finally he spoke again. I heard what happened at the market, he said, his tone measured. Lucas defended you. Elena stiffened, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. Yes, she whispered. Marlene tried to humiliate me. And him. There was another long pause. Then Mr. Raymond's voice, softer this time. You must care for him a great deal. Elena's throat tightened. She didn't know how to answer. She didn't owe him that truth, and yet something inside her refused to lie. I do, she said simply. Mr. Raymond stared out at the horizon, his weathered face illuminated by the golden glow of sunset. You deserve happiness, Elena, not a life forced upon you. Elena turned to look at him, confusion knitting her brow. For the first time there was no distance, no quiet judgment in his expression, only sorrow and something deeper. Regret. I have something to tell you, he said, his voice trembling ever so slightly. Something I should have told you from the beginning. Elena's heart thudded painfully in her chest. What is it? She asked, barely daring to breathe. Mr. Raymond hesitated, his hands gripping the handle of his cane until his knuckles turned white. "I'm not just the man they married you to," he said finally. "I'm your father." The words fell between them like a thunderclap, cracking the stillness wide open. Elena recoiled, her mind spinning. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible." "I was young," Mr. Raymond continued, his voice breaking, "and foolish. My family didn't approve of your mother. They forced me to leave her. I didn't even know you existed until years later. When I found out, I swore I would find a way to protect you, even if it meant pretending to be someone I wasn't." Tears blurred Elena's vision. Her world tilted wildly, all the certainties she had clung to crumbling into dust. "You let them marry me to you," she choked out, anger and betrayal warring inside her. "You tricked me." "I know," Mr. Raymond said, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. "I hated every moment of it. But it was the only way I could get you away from Marlene's cruelty. I thought I was saving you." Elena stood abruptly, the bench scraping loudly against the ground. "You should have told me," she cried. "You should have trusted me." Mr. Raymond bowed his head, the lines on his face deepening. "You're right," he said hoarsely. "I was a coward. I only wanted to make things right. But instead, I hurt you." Elena turned away, tears streaming freely down her face. She needed air. She needed space. Without another word, she fled into the darkening woods, the trees swallowing her whole. She didn't know how long she ran before she stumbled into the clearing by the river, the place where her happiest memories lived. Collapsing to her knees, Elena sobbed until her body ached. She felt betrayed, confused, and impossibly alone. Footsteps crunched behind her, soft and cautious. She didn't need to look to know it was Lucas. Without a word, he sank down beside her, offering the simple, solid presence she had always counted on. "He told me," Elena whispered brokenly. "Mr. Raymond, he's my father." Lucas was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of her revelation. "That's a lot," he said gently. "It changes everything," Elena said. "And nothing." Lucas nodded slowly, his voice calm and steady. "You're still you, Elena. You're still the bravest, kindest person I know. None of this changes that." She leaned into him then, letting him bear her sorrow without asking for explanations or promises. For now, it was enough just to know that someone in this world truly saw her and stayed. The days that followed were a blur of heavy silences and sleepless nights. Elena could barely look at Mr. Raymond without feeling the sting of betrayal rise in her chest. She spent her mornings wandering the woods or sitting by the river, trying to make sense of the life she thought she knew, and the truth she never saw coming. Lucas visited when he could, sometimes sitting quietly with her for hours, asking nothing of her, giving her the space she needed. His silent loyalty was the only thing that anchored her when the world felt too loud, too cruel. Mr. Raymond never pushed her. He moved quietly around their small cottage, giving Elena wide berth, his steps slower, heavier. There was sorrow in his every glance, but he respected her distance, perhaps knowing that forgiveness could never be demanded. It had to be given freely, or not at all. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in strokes of gold and rose, Elena sat on the porch, hugging her knees to her chest. She watched the fields sway gently in the breeze and thought of her mother, of the love she remembered in fleeting fragments. She heard the familiar shuffle of Mr. Raymond's steps behind her. "Elena," he said quietly. "May I sit?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He lowered himself onto the step beside her with a soft grunt of effort. For a long moment they just sat together, the silence stretching between them. "I want to tell you something," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. Not as the man you were forced to marry, not even as your father. Just as someone who owes you the truth. Elena turned slightly toward him, listening. I loved your mother more than anything, he said, staring into the horizon. When my family made me leave her, it broke me. I thought I'd buried that part of my life. But when I found out about you, when I realized what kind of life you were trapped in, his voice broke and he took a shaky breath. I acted out of desperation. It wasn't right. I know that now. I should have trusted you enough to tell you everything from the start. Tears welled in Elena's eyes, but she blinked them back. You hurt me, she said, her voice trembling. You took away my choices. You made me feel trapped all over again. I know, Mr. Raymond said, his voice barely more than a whisper. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right, if you'll let me. The sincerity in his words cracked something open inside her. Elena realized in that moment that she was tired of carrying the weight of anger. It didn't erase the hurt, but maybe, just maybe, she could start to heal. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said honestly. Not today, maybe not tomorrow. Mr. Raymond nodded, acceptance etched deep into the lines of his face. I'll wait, he said simply. They sat together as the sky darkened, not as strangers bound by a lie, but as two broken souls trying, somehow, to build something honest from the wreckage. In the following days, something subtle shifted between them. Mr. Raymond didn't treat Elena like a wife anymore. He treated her like what she truly was, a daughter. He encouraged her to make her own choices. He gave her space, but also stood quietly in the background, offering support whenever she stumbled. At the same time, Elena began spending more time with Lucas. They spoke of dreams, of life beyond Willow Creek, of possibilities that once felt out of reach. Lucas never rushed her. He never pressed her for anything she wasn't ready to give. Instead, he simply stayed, steady as the earth beneath her feet. One evening, as the stars spilled across the velvet sky, Elena and Lucas sat together by the river. The same river that had witnessed her sorrow now listened quietly as she poured out her hopes and fears. I don't know who I am anymore, she confessed, her voice small. You're stronger than you think, Lucas said softly, his hand brushing lightly against hers. And you're not alone. For the first time in what felt like forever, Elena smiled. A real, fragile smile, but a smile nonetheless. Maybe she didn't have all the answers yet. Maybe her heart was still healing, slow and painful. But somewhere deep inside, a seed of hope had taken root. And Elena knew. She was not just surviving anymore. She was learning, little by little, how to live. The weeks following the revelation about Mr. Raymond's true identity passed slowly. Elena had retreated into herself, but not in the way she had before. She wasn't hiding from the world anymore, though she still found comfort in the quiet places. The river, the old oak tree, the solitary bench in the garden. The world had changed, and Elena had changed with it. The whispers from the townsfolk were softer now, though they still lingered. Some of them had stopped looking at her with pity, others with disdain. There was something different in the way they regarded her. She had become a subject of curiosity, but not just because of her forced marriage. No, now they were watching a girl they thought was broken begin to rise again. It was in those moments, when Elena passed through the market and saw the uncertain looks of the villagers, that she realized her transformation wasn't about others' approval. It wasn't about their kindness or their judgment. It was about how she saw herself now. The truth about Mr. Raymond, that he was her father, had shaken her deeply. It had fractured her sense of what was real, what she could trust. But with time, the pieces had slowly started to fit back together. Not in the way they once were, but in a new form, a more honest form. Mr. Raymond, for his part, kept his distance, but not out of coldness. He had quietly settled into his role as the father he had never been, at least in the ways that Elena needed. Every morning, he made a point of checking in on her, offering his support without demanding anything in return. The old man who had once held her hostage with his secrets now stood at the sidelines, waiting for Elena to find her way. And when she did speak, when she did offer him a fragment of her thoughts or feelings, he listened, quietly, patiently, like someone who knew he could never make up for the years lost, but would try, each day, to make things right. It was on one such quiet morning that Lucas appeared, as he often did, with no fanfare, just his steady presence. He carried a small wrapped package in his hands, looking almost nervous as he stepped onto the porch where Elena sat, deep in thought. He hesitated for just a moment before handing it to her. "This is for you," he said, his voice calm, but filled with something like hope. Elena looked at him, her eyes tracing the package. For a second, she wondered if it was another small kindness, one of many that Lucas had offered her, all with no expectation, just genuine care. But this felt different. She carefully unwrapped it, revealing a leather-bound journal. The craftsmanship was simple, yet beautiful. The deep brown leather felt warm in her hands, as if it had been waiting just for her. "I thought," Lucas started, his voice softer now, "you might want to write down your thoughts. Your story, not the one everyone else has written for you." Tears sprang to Elena's eyes. It was a small gesture, but in it, she saw so much more. She saw the respect he had for her, the recognition that she was more than her circumstances, more than what had been forced upon her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Lucas said with a gentle smile. "Just write. Your story deserves to be told." Elena held the journal close to her chest, feeling the weight of it not just physically but emotionally. It was a symbol of something she had long forgotten, that she could write her own future. That, no matter what had happened, there was still time to create something new. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the porch. As the first stars began to twinkle, Elena opened the journal for the first time. The pages were blank, ready for her thoughts, her emotions, her story. For a long time, she simply stared at the empty pages. She didn't know what to write yet, but she could feel something shifting inside her. The past had held her tightly, smothering her with its suffocating grip. But now she was ready to start anew. With a deep breath, she finally picked up the pen and wrote the first words she had spoken aloud to herself in months. "This is the story of how I learned to stand, even when the world tried to break me, and how, in the ruins of my past, I found something stronger, hope." The words seemed small, but as she wrote them, Elena felt them settle into her soul. The weight of her past wasn't gone, but it was lighter now. And as she closed the journal, she knew she was ready to move forward. But not just forward, she was ready to soar. The next few weeks brought with them the undeniable scent of change. It wasn't just in the air, crisp and cool as autumn set in, but in the way Elena carried herself. Her shoulders were straighter now, her step more certain. She found herself looking forward to each day, not because she knew what it would bring, but because she knew she could handle whatever came. It was a quiet transformation. Nothing grand, nothing earth-shattering. But it was hers, and it was real. Lucas continued to be her anchor, his presence steady and unwavering. He didn't push her, didn't ask for anything beyond her company and her trust. And in turn, Elena began to let herself trust again. She leaned on him, not as a crutch, but as someone who had seen her at her lowest and never flinched. And then, one evening, As the leaves rustled in the wind and the world seemed to pause, Lucas turned to Elena with a quiet seriousness in his eyes. "Elena," he said softly, "I need to ask you something." Her heart skipped a beat, but she said nothing, simply nodding for him to continue. "Will you marry me?" The words hung in the air between them, both simple and life-altering. Elena blinked, stunned for a moment. She hadn't expected this. Not now. Not when there was still so much she needed to figure out. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something familiar. Hope, a promise, a future. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Yes, yes, I will." Lucas smiled, a slow, soft grin that reached his eyes and lit them with an unmistakable warmth. And in that moment, Elena knew deep in her bones, that no matter what happened from here on out, she would never have to face it alone. The days leading up to their wedding were filled with a quiet kind of excitement, the kind that settled deep in Elena's chest and made her heart flutter. It wasn't the kind of extravagant affair that would make Willow Creek the talk of the county. Instead, it was small, intimate, an expression of love that had quietly grown through all the pain and hardship. For the first time in her life, Elena was making a choice entirely for herself. No one was forcing her hand. No one was making decisions in the shadows. And that was more than enough. Lucas never let her feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. Every moment he spent with her felt like a shared understanding, a silent promise that he was there, no matter what. He supported her every step of the way, but most of all, he gave her space to breathe, to heal, to embrace the love they were building together. The wedding day arrived in a quiet blaze of sunlight. The small chapel by the river was filled with a handful of people, those who truly mattered. The elders of the town, the few who had once whispered about her, now stood by her side, offering their quiet approval, even if they weren't entirely sure how to feel about the changes that had swept through Willow Creek. Elena stood in front of the altar, her hands trembling with nerves, her heart pounding against her chest. She wore a simple white dress, a symbol of the purity of the love she was about to embrace. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and for the first time in years, there was a light in her eyes, a brightness that had been missing for so long. Lucas stood at the altar, waiting for her, his expression soft but intense. He was dressed in a suit that fit him perfectly, his strong build commanding attention, yet his gaze never wavered from Elena. When their eyes met across the room, something shifted, something deep and undeniable. It was as if, in that one glance, they both knew that everything they had endured had led them to this very moment. And this moment was everything. The ceremony was simple, yet it felt like the most profound thing Elena had ever experienced. The minister, an older man who had seen the town change many times over, spoke gently, words that seemed to wrap around Elena like a protective shield. But it was the moment she stepped forward to say her vows that the room fell silent. Every word she spoke came from a place deep inside her, words she had never thought she would say, words she had never believed she'd have the courage to say. "I, Elena, take you, Lucas, to be my husband, to love you in the quiet moments and in the chaos, to stand with you in times of joy and sorrow. I promise to never again lose myself, but to grow with you, beside you, as we build a future together." The silence that followed her vows was thick, heavy with the weight of their journey. And then, Lucas stepped forward, his voice a soft whisper as he spoke his own vows. "Elena," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I promise to always see you, to protect you, to love you through every storm and sunny day. I have walked through my life waiting for something, and now I know what that something was. You. I promise to be the man you deserve, and to stand by you, no matter what." The moment Lucas placed the ring on Elena's finger, a hush fell over the chapel. It wasn't just a symbol of their love, It was a promise that they would walk through life together, hand in hand, no matter what came their way. After the ceremony, they moved to the small reception at the town hall. The room was filled with familiar faces. Those who had once judged her, whispered behind her back, and treated her like an outcast. But today, they looked at her differently. There was no malice in their eyes anymore, only the quiet respect for the woman who had fought for her happiness. Elena wasn't just the girl who had been married off to an old man. She wasn't the girl who had suffered in silence. She was the woman who had risen from the ashes, the woman who had chosen to take control of her own life. And as the townspeople saw the woman she had become, they couldn't help but admire her strength. Marlene stood in the corner of the room, her arms crossed tightly. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't sneering either. It was the first time Elena had seen her stepmother without judgment in her eyes. Perhaps it was because Marlene had seen her daughter grow in ways she never thought possible. Perhaps it was the first sign of understanding between them, a fragile understanding, but one nonetheless. Elena's gaze wandered to Lucas, who was surrounded by some of the village men, laughing and chatting. She knew in that moment that she had chosen the right man. Not because he was perfect, but because he loved her perfectly in all her imperfections. Her heart swelled with a new kind of love, one that wasn't about passion alone, but about trust, respect, and an unshakable foundation. After the reception, as the sun set behind the hills, Mr. Raymond approached Elena. His eyes were glistening with unshed tears, but there was a smile on his face, soft and full of pride. He held out a small package wrapped in fine cloth. "This is for you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "A gift from me." Elena hesitated, then gently took the package from his hands. Inside was a key to a house that had been promised to her long ago, but one that now symbolized something much deeper than just a home. "I don't have much," Mr. Raymond said quietly, "but this house is yours, Elena. It's where you can finally be free to live your life the way you've always deserved." Elena's heart swelled with emotion. She hadn't expected this. It wasn't about the house. It was about the gesture. It was about him finally giving her something that was hers and hers alone. "I'll make it a home," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. As the evening drew to a close, Elena and Lucas left the town hall hand in hand. The night air was cool and crisp, and the stars above them seemed to shine brighter than ever. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it was theirs. Together, Elena and Lucas had faced their darkest days, and now they were ready to embrace the future. The past, with all its pain and heartbreak, was behind them, and in the distance, there was a new beginning waiting. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a real one, a life built on resilience, love, and the understanding that no matter what the world throws at them, they would face it side by side. And as they walked into the future, Elena knew one thing for certain. She was finally free. Months passed, and life in Willow Creek had irrevocably changed. It wasn't just the seasons that had shifted. Something deeper, something more lasting, had settled into the village. Elena and Lucas were no longer just survivors of their circumstances. They were beacons of hope, standing tall for everyone who had ever been overlooked, judged, or condemned. Their love had transformed them, and through their love, the town had begun to transform as well. The house Mr. Raymond had gifted Elena became a symbol of new beginnings. The small, modest cottage that had once stood as a place of isolation and despair now radiated warmth and promise. Elena poured her heart into making it a home, not just for herself and Lucas, but for anyone who needed a place of refuge. The garden bloomed with color, the rooms were filled with laughter, and the door was always open, not just to friends, but to those in need of compassion. Elena knew she would never forget her past, but she had made peace with it. The pain no longer defined her. It had shaped her, yes, but it no longer controlled her. She had learned to live fully, with her heart open to the possibilities of the future. Lucas and Elena spent their days working side by side, their hands building not just a life, but a community. Lucas's skills as a hunter and his natural leadership had earned him the respect of the village men. He didn't just lead with strength. He led with kindness and integrity. He taught the younger men of Willow Creek about honor, hard work, and responsibility, instilling in them the same quiet confidence that had first drawn Elena to him. But it was Elena's vision that truly transformed Willow Creek. She worked tirelessly to bring people together, creating programs that helped the less fortunate, providing them with resources, food, and most importantly, a sense of belonging. Through her own journey, she had learned that healing wasn't just about oneself, it was about lifting others up as well. In a small town where the past was often carried like a heavy weight, Elena had learned to make peace with hers, and now she was teaching others to do the same. People came to her for advice, for strength, and for guidance. They saw in her the embodiment of resilience, and they were inspired. One chilly afternoon, as the golden leaves began to fall, Elena and Lucas sat on the porch of their home, watching the world go by. The air smelled of wood smoke and earth, a scent that felt like home. It was in these quiet moments, sitting side by side, that Elena felt most at peace. But just as she settled into the comfort of their shared silence, a carriage appeared down the winding dirt road. It was an unfamiliar sight, one that made her heart skip a beat. Elena stood up, her eyes narrowing as she watched the carriage slow to a stop. The figure that emerged from the carriage was one she hadn't seen in months, the last person she had ever expected to see again. Marlene, her stepmother, stepped out, her face as stern as ever, though there was something different in her eyes, something softer. She stood at the foot of the steps, looking up at Elena with an unreadable expression. Lucas stood, his gaze steady. He didn't speak, but Elena could feel the tension between them. He had made peace with the town, with the people who had once judged them, but Marlene had always been a thorn in their side. "Elena," Marlene said quietly, her voice lacking the venom it once held. "I came to see you, to apologize." Elena didn't know what to say. The years of mistreatment, the judgment, the cruelty, those memories were hard to let go of. But she remembered what Lucas had taught her, that forgiveness wasn't just for the other person, it was for herself. She stepped forward slowly, looking her stepmother in the eyes. "You've caused me a lot of pain, Marlene," she said, her voice steady, "but I'm not the same person I was when I left that house." Marlene nodded, her eyes filling with unshed tears. "I know," she said softly. "And I'm sorry. I was wrong. I pushed you away when you needed me the most. I didn't know how to be the mother you needed." For the first time, Elena saw the woman who had once been a distant, cold figure as something else, someone who, too, had suffered in her own way. Marlene had made her mistakes, but perhaps she, too, was capable of change. "I'm sorry, too," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "For holding on to my anger for so long, for not letting go sooner." Marlene smiled faintly, the weight of years-old tension lifting just a little. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying more weight than any apology she had ever given before. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden hue over the land, the two women stood on the porch, no longer as adversaries, but as two people who had learned to move forward, to heal, and to let go. The seasons changed, as they always do, but this time, for Elena, they brought a new chapter. She and Lucas had built not just a life together, but a legacy, a community where everyone, no matter their past, could find redemption and hope. The town that had once whispered about them now celebrated them as leaders, as examples of the power of love, forgiveness, and resilience. Elena knew there would always be challenges, but she also knew she had the strength to face them. The love she had for Lucas, the man who had stood by her side through every trial, was unshakable. And with him, she would face the future, whatever it may bring, with confidence and grace. And so, under the same stars that had once witnessed her pain, Elena and Lucas stood together. The world ahead was vast, but they had already walked through the hardest part of their journey. Together, they had found their way back to each other and to a future full of promise. And so, as Elena and Lucas stood hand in hand, looking out at the bright future they had created together, the town of Willow Creek had transformed too. It was no longer the place of judgment and whispers it once was. It had become a community, built on love, forgiveness, and the unshakable belief that no matter how broken you might feel, there's always a chance to rebuild and start fresh. Elena's journey wasn't easy, but it was her own. It was filled with pain, yes, but also with strength, resilience, and the power of love. And as she looked at the life she now shared with Lucas, her partner, her strength, her love, she knew that the future was hers to shape. Together, they were unstoppable. But what about you, the ones watching this story unfold? Have you ever found the courage to forgive someone who hurt you deeply? Or perhaps you've had to rebuild your life, just like Elena. What does strength and love mean to you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment letting me know what you thought. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate Elena's journey? What do you think will happen next for her and Lucas? And if you want more inspiring stories like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future uploads. Your support means the world to me, and I'm so grateful to have you here. Thanks for watching, and remember, no matter what life throws at you, love, forgiveness, and resilience can always light your way. Stay blessed, and I'll see you in the next video.